Welcome, dear friends, to Family Shadows, the place where untold family stories unfold, where love and betrayal live side by side, and where quiet justice often finds its voice. If you're new here, I invite you to subscribe. It's free, and it means you'll never miss the moments that break our hearts, challenge our values, and remind us of what truly matters: family. Today's story carries the weight of a father's heart, both literally and figuratively. It is called 30 Minutes Before Surgery. I overheard my son and daughter-in-law's plan, so I decided. Now let us begin. Martin Cole lay in the hospital bed, staring at the pale ceiling tiles that seemed to multiply into infinity. The room smelled of antiseptic, the scent sharp enough to sting his nose. The sheets were stiff, tucked tight around him like the hospital was trying to pin him down, hold him still, remind him he was a patient, not a man. He hated that. He had always been a man of action, a carpenter by trade, a builder by spirit. The kind of man who measured twice, cut once, and trusted the steadiness of his own two hands. But now those hands trembled on the thin blanket, spotted with age, veins raised like ridges of an old road. 62. That's how old he was. Old enough to have lived through loss, old enough to know what it felt like to bury the love of your life. Sarah had been gone 10 years, and still her absence filled the room as tangibly as the hiss of the oxygen machine in the corner. It was Sarah's voice he heard when the nights grew long. "Don't let greed touch this family, Martin. Promise me." She had said it with her last breath, her hand frail as paper against his cheek. He had promised. At the time, he thought she was talking about outsiders, about the world that tried to chew men up and spit them out. He never dreamed she was warning him about their own blood. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 in the afternoon, 30 minutes. That was all that stood between him and the operating table. 30 minutes before doctors split his chest open to fix the heart that had carried too many burdens for too long. The nurse had just left, her shoes squeaking against the polished linoleum, her voice gentle but brisk. "Mr. Cole, just relax. Dr. Foster will be in shortly." Relax. The word felt foreign. The door closed with a click, and that's when he heard it, the murmur of voices in the hallway. At first he paid no attention. Hospitals were full of whispers after all, but then he caught a name. "Eric," Jessica's voice hissed. "We don't have much time." Martin's ears sharpened, every sense suddenly alive. His son's name was not one he ignored. He tilted his head toward the door, careful not to move too much, careful not to betray that he was listening. Jessica's voice carried a sharp edge, the kind that cut clean through walls. "He needs to sign those papers before they wheel him in. After the surgery, who knows how long he'll last or what state he'll be in." Martin's stomach turned. The words dripped with calculation. Eric's voice came next, lower, steadier. "I know, don't rush me. Dad trusts Stephen. If Stephen brings the papers, Dad won't question it. He'll sign." Martin's chest tightened, not from the failing heart inside him, but from the betrayal that clawed at his insides. Stephen, his old friend, his lawyer, the man he trusted to protect him, protect his family. Jessica again, more urgent. "Then make sure it happens. The house, the investments, the accounts, they should be ours now. It's what he owes us. You know how much I've sacrificed to be in this family." Martin shut his eyes, the sting of her words burning behind them. "Ours, owes us." His son and daughter-in-law were treating his life, his legacy, like an invoice to be collected. His breathing quickened. The monitor beside him beeped faster, recording every ounce of pain that wasn't physical at all. He thought back to Eric as a boy. Blonde hair sticking up in cowlicks, sneakers untied, running through the yard with a laugh that could light the whole block. Martin used to sit on the porch, hammer in one hand, coffee in the other, watching his son chase fireflies in the dusk. He remembered the day he handed Eric his first set of tools. A small wooden box with a hammer, a screwdriver, and a level. "A man takes care of his family," Martin had told him. "With these you can build, you can fix, you can provide." Eric had smiled so wide that day, his little fingers tracing the smooth wood, his eyes shining with pride. Where did that boy go? Martin wondered now. When did the sparkle of creation turn into the hunger for possession? When did love of family get replaced by greed for inheritance? The voices outside hushed as footsteps approached. Martin turned his head back to the ceiling, pretending to drift, though his pulse thudded like a drum. The door creaked open just slightly, enough for him to hear Eric sigh. "Remember, Jess," Eric muttered. "Keep calm, Dad's weak. He'll sign, and then—" His voice trailed off as they walked away. Martin's hand trembled as it reached into his pocket, pulling out the worn leather wallet he always carried. Inside, tucked behind the credit cards and insurance papers, was a faded photograph of Sarah. Her smile was gentle, her eyes the kind that forgave easily but never forgot. He stared at her now, whispering under his breath, "Sarah, you knew, didn't you? You warned me." His throat tightened. For a moment he felt like a man drowning not from water but from betrayal. The monitor beeped steadily beside him, echoing the rhythm of his fragile heart. 30 minutes. That's all he had before they wheeled him into the unknown. 30 minutes before everything changed, one way or another. The hallway outside Martin's room buzzed with the muted rhythm of hospital life. Carts rolled over polished linoleum. Nurses exchanged clipped instructions, and somewhere down the hall, a television murmured the afternoon news. Yet beneath that ordinary noise, Martin heard the one sound that mattered, the low, urgent voices of his son and daughter-in-law. He shifted slightly on the bed, the paper-thin gown rustling against his skin, and strained to listen. His heart monitor quickened, the small spikes on the screen keeping pace with every word that floated in through the cracked door. Jessica's tone was impatient, almost sharp enough to cut through steel. "Eric, don't hesitate. This is the only time we have. If your father goes into surgery without signing, everything could get complicated." "Keep your voice down," Eric muttered, though his own voice carried that edge of calculation that made Martin's stomach tighten. "Stephen will bring the paperwork soon. Dad trusts him. He won't even read it, he'll just sign." Martin's throat went dry. He pictured Stephen Clark, his lawyer of over 20 years, walking into this very room with a neat stack of documents. A man he once played poker with on Fridays. A man who had stood beside him at Sarah's funeral, who had squeezed his shoulder and whispered, "I'll look after your family like my own." Could Stephen be part of this too? Jessica's heels clicked softly on the tile. Good, because once the ink dries, everything will finally be ours. The house, the savings, the business shares everything. After all these years, Eric, it's time. Ours, that word again. It clawed into Martin's chest like a hook. He gripped the rails of the bed, knuckles pale, willing himself not to cry out, not to let them know he had heard. The footsteps faded, leaving behind only the hollow silence of betrayal. Martin sank back against the pillow. The air felt heavier, thicker, like he was breathing through cloth. He stared at the ceiling, but he didn't see the white tiles anymore. He saw Sarah's face, framed by the kitchen window of their old home, flour on her hands as she baked bread on a Sunday morning. She had smiled at him, her eyes alive with that mix of mischief and kindness that had always kept him steady. Don't let greed touch the heart of this family. How had she known? How had she sensed that Eric, their only son, might one day lose himself to hunger for more? Martin pressed a hand over his chest, feeling the weak thud beneath his ribs. It wasn't just his heart that was failing him, it was the trust he had built his entire life upon. The door creaked open again, this time wider. A nurse peeked in, her smile polite. "Mr. Cole, everything all right?" He forced a nod, his voice hoarse. "Yes, just waiting." She checked the monitor, adjusted the Roman 4 line, and offered another smile before leaving. The door clicked shut, and once again he was alone. Alone with thoughts that cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. Martin tried to reason with himself. Maybe he had misheard. Maybe Jessica's words didn't mean what he thought. Maybe Eric was under pressure, stressed, saying things he didn't mean. But deep down he knew. A father always knows when his child has strayed too far. The minutes dragged. Each second felt like a weight dropped into his chest. His eyes wandered to the chair in the corner. The chair where Eric used to sit after football practice, gulping down water while Martin asked about his day. The boy he had raised to believe in honesty now schemed for signatures and accounts. There was no anger in Martin, not yet. There was only sorrow, a deep, bone-heavy sorrow that made his eyes sting. And then footsteps returned. He didn't have to wonder whose they were. The voices came clearer now, right outside his door. "Jessica again. Eric, I don't care if it feels wrong. Your father's had his time. We need to think about our future. You deserve this. I deserve this. After everything we've done for him." Martin's chest burned. Done for him. As if his decades of sacrifice, of long hours building a business, of saving and scraping, of holding the family together after Sarah's death, meant nothing. Eric's reply was softer, almost hesitant. "I know, but if he refuses," Jessica cut him off. "Then you make sure he doesn't. He's weak, Eric. He'll sign." The words rang in Martin's ears like a bell tolling in the distance. Weak. He was their father, their elder, the man who had given them everything, and now he was nothing but a signature waiting to be collected. He shut his eyes, gripping Sarah's photograph in his hand. The edges were worn, the corners frayed. He whispered into the silence, so faint no one could hear. "Not yet, Sarah. I won't let them win." The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, thin stripes stretching across the sterile walls. Martin let his eyes follow them, tracing the shadows as if they could lead him somewhere far away, back to a time when the word family didn't feel like a burden. He remembered Eric as a boy. There had been a summer when Eric was no older than 8, his legs scabbed from endless hours of running through the backyard. Martin had been repairing the old shed, sweat dripping down his neck when Eric came tugging at his sleeve. "Dad," he had said, eyes bright, "can I help?" Martin had handed him a small hammer, too heavy for his little hands, yet Eric gripped it with determination. Together they nailed a crooked piece of wood, and when it finally held, Eric looked up with pride written all over his face. Sarah had watched from the kitchen window, clapping her flour-dusted hands, laughing like the world was simple and good. Those were the moments Martin built his life upon. Not the money in the bank, not the deeds to the house. It was the sound of his son's laughter, the sight of Sarah's smile, the warmth of family gathered around a worn wooden table. Now, lying in this hospital bed, he felt the distance between then and now stretch like a canyon. His chest tightened, not just from the failing heart, but from the ache of broken trust. He had raised Eric with values, hard work, honesty, responsibility. He had believed in his son. He had trusted him with the family's future. And now that trust felt shattered. Stephen will bring the papers. Eric's words replayed in his head, sharp as glass. Stephen Clark, his oldest friend. They had built lives side by side, one handling tools, the other handling contracts. Martin could still picture Stephen at his wedding, raising a glass of champagne, his voice ringing with cheer. To Martin and Sarah, may your life together be as sturdy as the houses you build. Could that man really betray him now? Or had Eric twisted him, cornered him, convinced him? Martin's hand trembled as he pulled the photograph of Sarah closer to his chest. He spoke to it as if she were still there, as if her voice could guide him. I don't know who to trust anymore, Sarah. Not Eric, maybe not even Stephen, but I can't let them turn our life's work into ashes. A knock at the door startled him. The sound was gentle, but in Martin's ears it rang like thunder. Come in, he managed, his voice low. The door opened and there stood Stephen Clark, papers tucked neatly under his arm. His suit was crisp, his hair touched with gray, and his eyes carried that same professional calm Martin had trusted for decades. Martin even said with a smile that seemed practiced, "How are you holding up?" Martin studied him, searching his face for cracks, for any hint of guilt or hesitation, but Stephen's expression gave nothing away. "I've been better," Martin replied, voice steady though his pulse hammered beneath the sheets. Stephen pulled up a chair, laying the folder on the small table beside the bed. "There are just a few things we should take care of before surgery. Nothing complicated. Routine. Routine." The word echoed bitterly. Martin's gaze flicked to the folder. He imagined the lines of text, the signature lines waiting like open jaws. He imagined Eric's face, Jessica's sharp whisper, "He'll sign, he's weak." No, he wasn't weak, not yet. The hallway hummed outside, the hospital moving on with its indifferent rhythm. Inside, the air thickened as Stephen slid a pen from his pocket. Martin steadied himself. He would not rush. He would not let grief or fear dictate his hand. He would remember Sarah's voice, her promise. He would remember the boy Eric once was, the boy who deserved a father's love but not a blank check for his greed. He looked Stephen in the eye and said quietly, "Before I sign anything, Stephen, tell me, are you here as my lawyer or as my son's?" Stephen hesitated at Martin's question. His hand paused on the pen, his eyes flickering for just a moment before returning to that lawyer's calm, professional mask. "As your lawyer, Martin," he said smoothly. "Always." Martin studied him carefully. He had known Stephen long enough to read the tiny twitches in his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes avoided direct contact for just a second too long. There was something unsaid there, buried under layers of professionalism. Stephen cleared his throat and tapped the folder. "It's just precautionary. In case anything happens during surgery, it's best to have your estate and medical directives in order. That way your wishes are clear. It will take only a minute." The words slid across the air like oil on water, smooth, practiced, but impossible to trust. Martin reached for the folder, his fingers brushing the cover, but he didn't open it. Instead, he asked softly, "Did Eric talk to you about this?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Stephen adjusted his tie, the faintest crack in his composure. "He's concerned for you, Martin. That's all. He wants to make sure everything is taken care of." Martin's heart monitor betrayed him, its steady beep climbing as his pulse quickened. He could almost hear Jessica's whisper echoing, "He'll sign. He's weak. Weak. He would not be weak." "Stephen," Martin said, his voice steadier now, though his chest burned with betrayal, "you've been my friend for more than 30 years. You stood by me when Sarah passed. You know what she asked of me. You know what she feared." Stephen's gaze flickered, a shadow passing through it. Tell me the truth. Martin pressed. Are these papers for me or for them? Stephen sighed, the sound heavy, almost weary. For a moment Martin thought he saw regret. Then the mask slid back into place. Sign them, Martin. It's the best thing you can do. The room seemed smaller now, the air pressing in. Martin stared at the folder as if it were a snake coiled and waiting to strike. His chest ached, not from illness but from the weight of choice. He thought of Sarah's last words. He thought of Eric as a child, hammering crooked nails into a board with pride. He thought of Jessica's voice dripping with entitlement and of the life he had worked for, the life meant to carry meaning, not greed. Slowly, Martin reached out and opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page. The words blurred slightly, but he forced himself to focus. Transfers, assignments, control, line after line, all leading to the same outcome. Everything placed into Eric and Jessica's hands. His hands trembled. The pen gleamed in Stephen's grip, waiting. Just sign, Martin, Stephen said quietly. It will give you peace. Peace. The word was almost laughable. Signing would not give him peace. It would hand his entire life to two people who saw him as nothing but a transaction. Martin's breath came heavier now, his chest rising and falling beneath the hospital gown. The monitor beeped faster, a shrill metronome to his racing thoughts. He closed the folder with a firm hand. No, he said, his voice soft but resolute. Not yet. Stephen leaned forward, lowering his tone. Martin, listen to me. If something happens on that table, if you don't make these decisions now, the courts will decide. Eric and Jessica will end up with it anyway. This way, at least it's clean. Martin's eyes narrowed. Clean for who? For the first time, Stephen faltered. His lips parted, then closed again. The silence stretched between them, thick with history, trust, and betrayal. The door opened suddenly. Eric stepped in, Jessica right behind him. Their faces wore matching masks of concern, though the urgency in their eyes betrayed something else. Dad, Eric said quickly, his voice low and coaxing. Stephen explained everything right. This is just paperwork. You don't need to worry about the details. Just sign and you can go into surgery without a single concern. Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We only want what's best for you, Martin. Please let us help. Martin's gaze moved from Eric to Jessica, then back to Stephen. 3 pairs of eyes on him, waiting, pressing, suffocating. The weight of expectation pressed down like the very walls were leaning in. His heart pounded. His breath came shallow. His fingers brushed the edge of the folder again. He remembered Sarah's laughter, the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder at night, the way she whispered, "Don't let greed touch this family." And in that moment, Martin knew he would not sign. Not like this, not ever. The room was crowded now, not with bodies, but with pressure. Eric stood tall at the foot of the bed, arms folded as though he had already won. Jessica lingered at his side, her fingers curling over his sleeve, her smile stretched thin, hiding the sharpness beneath. Stephen sat close, the folder open like a trap waiting for its prey. And in the center of it all lay Martin, frail but unbroken, the beeping heart monitor, betraying every emotion he struggled to contain. Dad, Eric said again, softer this time, the voice of a son who once knew how to plead for ice cream after dinner. Please, it's just paperwork. Do it for us. Martin's gaze lingered on him, searching, hoping, just for a flicker of the boy he used to be. The boy who built crooked birdhouses with his father's help, who once fell asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. But that boy was nowhere to be found. What stood before him now was a man hardened by entitlement, sharpened by greed. Jessica leaned in, her perfume faint but cloying. Think of your legacy, Martin. Wouldn't it be better to leave it in the hands of your family rather than strangers? Isn't that what Sarah would have wanted? At the mention of Sarah's name, Martin's eyes burned. How dare she speak of Sarah, twisting her memory into a weapon? He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw Sarah's smile. He heard her voice. "Don't let greed touch this family." When he opened his eyes again, something had shifted. His body was weak, but his resolve had solidified like concrete. "I'll think about it," Martin said quietly, sliding the folder back toward Stephen. Eric frowned. "Dad, I said I'll think about it," Martin repeated, stronger this time. His voice might not carry the weight of his old carpenter's hammer, but it carried something else: authority. Jessica's lips pressed into a line. Stephen glanced at her, then back at Martin. "You don't have much time," he warned. Martin let out a slow breath. "Time is all I've got left to use wisely. If I'm about to gamble with what little I have, I'll be damned if I let anyone else hold the cards." For a moment, silence filled the room. Even the monitor seemed to slow, its steady beep settling back into rhythm. They didn't press further. Not now. Eric muttered something under his breath. Jessica tugged at his arm, and the two of them left, the door closing behind them with a sharp click. Stephen lingered a moment longer, his hand resting on the folder. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Martin," he said quietly. Martin turned his head, his eyes locking on his old friend. "And you're making this uglier than it should ever have been." For the first time, Stephen's composure cracked. His jaw tightened. Then, without another word, he gathered the papers and stepped out, leaving Martin alone in the dim light. Alone, but no longer unsure. Martin reached for the photograph of Sarah, pulling it close to his chest. His hands shook, but not from weakness. It was something else, something like defiance. "Sarah," he whispered, his throat thick. "You were right. You saw it before I did. But I promise you our life's work, our love, our family name, it won't be taken by their greed. Not while I still breathe." The monitor beeped steadily, each sound marking his vow. 30 minutes before surgery. 30 minutes to decide not just about his body, but about his legacy. And Martin had made his decision. He would not sign. He would fight in the only way left to him. Silently, strategically, with the quiet strength of a man who had built his world with his bare hands and refused to see it stolen. Outside the room, he could hear Eric and Jessica whispering again, plotting their next move. Their words no longer scared him. They only steeled him. Because Martin Cole was not the weak man they thought. He was a father, a builder, a keeper of promises. And in the shadow of betrayal, he had chosen his side. The hallway outside Martin's room never truly slept. Carts rattled, pages fluttered from clipboards, and the constant, sterile hum of the fluorescent lights filled every space. Yet amid the noise, one voice carried steady authority, the calm, measured tone of Dr. Helen Foster. She had been Martin's attending physician for the past week, guiding him through tests and explanations with a clarity that both comforted and unsettled him. A woman in her mid-40s, her eyes carried the kind of gravity that comes only from years spent standing at the thin line between life and death. This afternoon, as she walked past his room, Helen paused. She hadn't meant to, but something in the cadence of voices drifting through the doorway, sharp, hushed, frantic, caught her ear. "He has to sign before they take him in," Jessica hissed. Helen froze, her steps faltering. Eric's reply came tight with irritation. "Stop panicking. Stephen said he'd get it done. Dad won't question him. He's too tired, too scared to read." Helen's brow furrowed. She wasn't the sort of doctor who meddled in family matters, yet something in their words set her instincts flaring. She knew the way families sometimes circled around the vulnerable, waiting for their moment. She had seen it before. Signatures extracted in moments of weakness, inheritances fought over at bedsides. But never had she heard it so plainly. She lingered a moment longer, listening just enough to catch Jessica's parting whisper. "Once it's done, everything's ours." Helen continued her rounds, but the words followed her, a shadow pressing at her thoughts. When she entered Martin's room later, she studied him differently. His lined face was calm, but his eyes, those betrayed, storm-tossed eyes, spoke volumes. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, setting the chart aside. "How are you holding up?" Martin offered a faint smile. "As well as a man about to be cut open can be." She allowed herself a quiet chuckle, but her eyes never left his. There was something there, something unspoken. "Is something troubling you?" she asked. Martin hesitated. His instinct was to keep it inside, to shoulder it silently. But Sarah's photograph still rested under his pillow, and he could almost feel her urging him, "You can't fight this alone." "They want me to sign papers," he whispered finally, his voice hoarse. "Papers that would hand them everything. My son, my daughter-in-law, even Stephen," his voice cracked. "People I trusted." Helen's heart sank. The fragments she overheard now had shape, weight, undeniable truth. She pulled the chair closer, lowering her voice. "You don't have to sign anything you don't understand, Mr. Cole. Not today, not ever." Martin's eyes glistened. "They think I'm weak. They think I'll fold before the knife, but I won't, not this time." Helen reached for his hand, her grip firm, steady. "Then don't, and know this, you're not alone." For the first time all day, Martin felt something other than despair. Relief washed through him, though fragile and fleeting. Someone had heard, someone else knew. The door opened and Stephen stepped in again, folder in hand. Behind him, Eric and Jessica hovered, their faces arranged into masks of concern. "Martin," Stephen began, his tone businesslike, "we need to finish this before they prep you for surgery." But as he approached, Helen rose from her chair. She placed herself between the bed and the folder, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Mr. Cole is not signing anything until after surgery," she said. "His priority right now is his health. If there are legal matters, they can wait." Jessica blinked, momentarily stunned by the doctor's boldness. Eric's jaw tightened. "Doctor, with all respect, this is a family matter." Helen's gaze didn't waver. "With all respect, Mr. Cole is my patient, and right now, his well-being is my only concern." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking just slightly. Jessica's lips curled in disdain, but she said nothing. Eric clenched his fists, barely restraining his anger. Martin, watching it all unfold, felt the faintest spark of triumph. For the first time, someone had spoken aloud what he couldn't. Someone had drawn a line. When the trio finally left, Helen turned back to Martin, her expression softening. "You still have choices, Mr. Cole. Don't forget that." Martin nodded, clutching Sarah's photo tighter. He whispered in his heart, "I won't forget, I won't give in." Outside in the corridor, Eric's voice carried in a harsh whisper. "This isn't over." And Martin knew it wasn't. The gurney wheels squeaked as two orderlies pushed Martin down the hall. The corridor lights flashed overhead in steady rhythm, white, sterile, unblinking. Each passing fixture felt like a countdown. 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5. Martin clutched the thin blanket at his chest. The Roman 4 tugged at his arm, but his mind was sharper than it had been in days. The decision had already been made. He would not surrender, not to Eric, not to Jessica, not even to Stephen. When the double doors of the operating wing swung open, Martin caught sight of them, Eric and Jessica, standing stiff at the nurse's station. Jessica's smile was tight, calculated. Eric's eyes darted toward the folder clutched under Stephen's arm. They followed. "Dad," Eric called, walking alongside the gurney. "Before you go in, we just need your signature. It's for your safety, nothing more." Martin didn't reply. He fixed his eyes on the ceiling, steady and unmoving, as though silence itself could shield him. Jessica leaned closer, her whisper hot in his ear. "If you care about us at all, Martin, sign it. Don't drag this out." Her words stung, not because of their sharpness, but because of their emptiness. Care about us. The irony was cruel. After everything he had given them, this was what care had become. The operating room doors opened. Inside, Dr. Helen Foster waited in her surgical cap, eyes steady behind her mask. She gave Martin a small nod, the kind that carried unspoken promise. "I'm here." As the orderlies lifted him to the operating table, Stephen stepped forward, placing the folder on the rolling tray beside Martin's bed. "Martin," Stephen said, his voice low, coaxing, almost pleading, "it's time. Just a signature. Then you can rest easy." The pen glinted under the harsh surgical lights. Martin turned his head, meeting Stephen's gaze. He saw not just the lawyer, but the man who had once been his friend. He wanted to believe there was still loyalty buried somewhere in those tired eyes, but trust, once fractured, never shone the same again. Helen stepped forward, breaking the silence. "This is not the time for legal matters," she said firmly. Eric bristled. "Doctor, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Helen cut in. Her tone, though calm, carried the weight of command. "This man is about to undergo major surgery. The only papers he'll be signing today are consent forms for anesthesia, nothing more." Jessica's voice rose, sharp with panic. "You have no right to interfere." Helen's gaze sharpened. "I have every right. He is my patient, and unless you want this surgery canceled, you will step back." The room froze. The tension hung heavy, so taut it might snap with a single breath. Then Stephen spoke. His voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Martin, if you don't do this now, the courts will decide. Eric and Jessica will still end up with everything. Isn't it better to choose while you can?" Martin's lips curved into something between sorrow and defiance. His voice, though faint, carried through the sterile air. "No," he said, "it's better to do what's right." Eric's face flushed red, his composure cracking. "Dad, don't be stubborn. This is for us, for your family." Martin's eyes burned as he fixed on his son. "Family," he whispered. "Family doesn't circle a man's hospital bed waiting for him to be too weak to say no. Family stands beside him, not above him." Jessica recoiled as if slapped. Eric's fists clenched, his breath coming sharp. For a moment the room seemed ready to erupt. But before another word could be said, Helen lifted her chin. "Enough. Out, both of you." Her voice was steel. The nurses glanced at each other, then moved to usher Eric and Jessica toward the door. Stephen lingered, folder still in hand, torn between loyalty and fear. Martin turned his face toward him one last time. "If you ever were my friend, Stephen, you'll leave too." Stephen hesitated, his jaw tightened. And then slowly he gathered the folder and walked out, his shoulders heavy, his silence louder than words. As the doors swung shut, the air changed. The weight lifted. Helen moved closer, placing a hand on Martin's shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said. Martin's eyes closed, his breath steadying. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt the quiet strength of standing firm, not with fists or anger, but with silence and resolve. The anesthesiologist leaned in, preparing the mask. The world blurred at the edges. Yet before the haze claimed him, Martin whispered a vow only Helen heard. "They won't take it from me. Not Sarah's memory, not our life, never. And with that, the lights dimmed into darkness. The world came back slowly. Beeps, hushed voices, the cool sting of oxygen flowing through a tube. Martin's eyes fluttered open, the sterile white ceiling greeting him once more. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then the weight of his chest reminded him the surgery had passed. Beside his bed, Dr. Helen Foster stood with her usual calm, chart in hand. "You made it through, Mr. Cole," she said gently. The procedure was a success. Martin's lips curved into the faintest smile. His body ached, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rasping. She nodded. "Rest now. The worst is behind you." But Martin knew the worst had not been the knife or the anesthesia. The worst had been facing the betrayal of his own blood and surviving it without surrender. Later that evening, Stephen Clark appeared at the doorway, his expression subdued. He carried no folder this time, only the look of a man humbled. "I tore up the papers," Stephen admitted quietly. "I shouldn't have let them push me. I forgot who I was supposed to serve. I forgot who you are, Martin." Martin studied him for a long moment, then gave a tired nod. "It's not too late to remember." Stephen's shoulders eased, relief flickering in his eyes. He left without another word, the weight of his guilt trailing behind him. Eric and Jessica did not come. Not that night, not the next morning. Their silence was louder than their presence would have been. Martin wondered if they felt shame or only anger at having been denied. Either way, he knew the truth now. He reached for Sarah's photograph, still tucked beneath his pillow. Holding it close, he whispered, "I kept my promise, Sarah. They'll never turn our life's work into ashes, not while I breathe." Weeks later, when Martin returned home, the house felt different. It wasn't bigger nor brighter, but it carried a new weight, the weight of resolve. He called Stephen back, this time not as a betrayer but as a penitent friend, and together they rewrote the documents, not for Eric, not for Jessica, but for something greater. A foundation in Sarah's name, scholarships for young carpenters, grants for families in need of homes, a legacy built not on greed but on giving. Martin signed those papers with steady hands, and for the first time in years he felt peace. He knew Eric and Jessica would one day come knocking, demanding explanations. They might scream, they might threaten, but Martin was no longer afraid, because true wealth was never in the money, never in the property. It was in the values he protected, the love he refused to let die, the quiet justice he carried to the very end. And so, Martin Cole left behind more than walls and dollars. He left a lesson, a reminder that family is not measured in inheritance or entitlement, but in loyalty, compassion, and respect. Dear friends, thank you for walking with me through this story. Stories like Martin's remind us that while betrayal can wound deeply, dignity and justice can heal in silence. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to Family Shadows so you can continue to share in these lessons of love, resilience, and the quiet strength of family. From my heart to yours, I wish you and your loved ones health, peace, and happiness in your family life.